welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Friday. I am very happy to be with you for the second time this week to bring you another author interview. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as always, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. Also, if you want to help the podcast and the network as a whole in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. This is always appreciated, never necessary, but you're going to see that scrolling underneath throughout the episode, and it is next to me in the video. But again, that is gsmcpodcast.info. If you want to leave a tip or a donation, you're also free to leave a question or a comment while you are there. I'm happy to engage with those after receiving them. I'll try to do that in the next episode after I receive those questions or comments. As always, your support is greatly appreciated, no matter what form that support takes. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you have something great planned for this weekend. We had a very, very rainy day today, which is great. We need the rain. It's the rainy season. It's winter, so we get rain. But it was one of those days where it was sunny and rainy, just depending. But I never managed to hit the sunshine at the right points. Took the dog out to go to the bathroom, got soaked. Went to run an errand with the hubby. We went to buy a birthday present, and we were going to take the recycling out on our way, and got drenched. Like, I literally just had to jump out of the car, grab the recycling, throw it in the bin. Got drenched. went to the grocery store tonight, and actually, I was listening to my audiobook because 99% of the time, if I'm running errands by myself, I'm listening to an audiobook. And I thought there was something wrong with the audiobook because there was this crazy weird noise. It turns out it was just a torrential downpour hitting the roof of the store while I was in there, and a metal roof. So that was crazy. Thankfully, I was inside for that, but then I got drenched again on the way back to the car. Just one of those days. Like I said, we need the rain, but I got soaked approximately, 247,000 times. They give or take 100,000. I don't know. I made me laugh, but rain is good, and I appreciate the rain. And I dry, so it's good. I get crazy hair, but I always have crazy hair, so not going to complain about the rain. I have a guest today. As you know, I am speaking today with author Eloisa James. Let me pull that book up. We are talking about the first book in her Accidental Brides series. It is called Viscount in Love. Let me go ahead and read you the description of this book. 1 second. I don't have the right screen up. There we go. Two eccentric orphans bring together a grumpy Viscount and the free-spirited heroine who steals his heart in the first novel in Eloisa James's new Accidental Bride series, in which haughty aristocrats find themselves married to the wrong women. He wants a nanny, not a bride. Suddenly, guardian to twins, Viscount Dominic Kelbourne is luckily betrothed to a suitable lady, until she elopes. With no time to woo, Dominic decides to marry his fiancée's unconventional sister. Torie isn't perfect, but their kisses are so passionate that society thinks he's actually chosen her. She wants to marry for love. Torie has never been able to make sense of words on a page, so she has turned her talents to art. She longs for a man who values her as she is, but marries for the sake of the twins. She doubts Dominic is capable of love, let alone respect, but as their heated debates turn into something more, Torie begins to imagine a life as a wife, not a nanny. But when the arrogant Viscount finds that his Viscountess has stolen his heart, he'll have to give all he has to win her love. That is the description of Viscount in Love. As I'm sure you have noticed, it is historical romance. And I mentioned at the end of the last episode when I was previewing this episode that in my teens and 20s, I read a lot of historical romance. I loved historical romance. This would have been absolutely right. It would have been catnip to me. And that isn't to say that I don't like historical romance now. I got out of the habit of reading it. You know how you kind of go in phases, and somehow I got out of the habit of reading historical romance. So this was so much fun to get back into a genre that I haven't read much of in a while, and remember why I liked it. This one is great because, yes, it is historical romance. It's got lots of the elements that you expect. It's got the alpha male. It's got a wedding that happens in an unconventional way, but there's so many other different layers here. You've got, we're going to talk about this, Eloisa is going to talk about this in terms of Torie, who is dyslexic. She can't read. It mentioned that in the description, and how that was dealt with or not dealt with in terms of the setting of this book. And just, I mean, I never really fully thought about it, I guess, what it would be like to be dyslexic in this time. And I mean, lots of people were illiterate, but that's not the case here. Lots of people try to teach Torie to read. She just can't. She can't make sense of the words on the page, and there's no understanding of that. So there's lots of ways of looking at historical fiction or using historical fiction as a lens on some of the things that are going on currently. And, sometimes it's just nice to read a book that is going to be an HOA, an HOA, a homeowners association, an HEA, a happily ever after. It's going to work out. They're going to have bumps, but in the end, it's going to work out. And I love them for that reason. But I love that there's a lot of things in this book that made me think about things in maybe a way I hadn't thought of before, or, just encourage me to go, oh, yeah, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And we're going to talk about those twins that are mentioned in the description too, because they're a couple of my favorite characters. But let's go ahead and let Mary, who writes as Eloisa James, talk about this book. Again, it is called Viscount in Love. The author is Eloisa James. Eloisa, hello, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you here to talk about Viscount in Love. Before we get to that book and some of the other books we may talk about, I would love it if you just take a moment to introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, everyone. So my real name is Mary Bly, but my pen name is Eloisa James. And I write historical romance, and I've been writing for a long time. So I've written a lot of books. But I would say my real life, I'm a Shakespeare professor at Fordham University. And so I balance it at the writing life and the Shakespeare life. At the moment, I'm on sabbatical from my university. So I'm living in Italy because I'm married to an Italian, and my daughter moved to Italy a couple years ago. She's a grown up now, she thinks. So, so yeah, I live this kind of tripart life where I'm partly in America, partly in Italy, partly a romance writer, partly a Shakespeare professor, and it allows me to feel creative and always be doing something different.
Wonderful. I have a million questions. I'll try to narrow it down. First off, how is Christmas in Italy? Because I picture it as being beautiful.
It's lovely. Yeah, I'm in Florence,
Okay.
which of course is one of the oldest cities, and so it is really beautiful, pedestrian in the center with no cars. So I was walking around yesterday, and the problem with it is that everything looks so gorgeous, and Italians are so good at color and so good at creating, pastries and chocolates, and you can spend $50 here, there, and the other place in 5 seconds, and then you see
Yeah.
a bookstore. So um, it's just a lovely place to be. And there's a Christmas market, of course,
Yes.
as I'm sure you have in Portugal, a Christmas
Yes.
market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was one thing I was looking forward to about moving to Europe because, and ours is our little Christmas market is tiny because I just live in a small village, but it's on a hill next to the Catholic Church and it looks out over the Atlantic Ocean. So it's usually
Wow.
t-shirt weather, 60 degrees and this gorgeous view
Yeah,
of the Atlantic Ocean. We're very spoiled.
that's really nice. Well, that is not the case here. I just had guests and they had to de-ice their plane this morning and
Oh, okay.
almost missed their connection. But it does give it a Christmassy feel.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
never know, we might have snow for Christmas. That'd be cool.
Snow on Christmas is good, and then it can depart if it so chooses. And then Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. Do you have a favorite Shakespeare play or even quote? If I don't know if it's unfair to ask you to choose.
Well, I would say, after being a professor so long, my favorite plays break down into ones that I prefer to teach. And so weird though it may seem, I love teaching Romeo and Juliet because people have had it in high school and they think it is so boring, it's so awful. They've watched the movies a million times. And somehow in high school, the teacher never told them, that Juliet is the first woman to propose marriage on the English stage, that Juliet is the first person to talk about the joys of consummating a marriage in the open on the stage, that Shakespeare really was just this incredible innovator, and Juliet is the innovator of that play. And so I love teaching it because you kind of take it apart and look at it, and by the end they're like, oh my God, it's not at all what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So
Not have that.
that's like, hello, you're not in high school anymore, now you're in college. So let's talk about this.
Didn't have either of those conversations in high school when we talked about Romeo and Juliet. So, yep,
I'm sure
absolutely.
not. Yep.
So, and then I have a rather silly question. So you write under a pen name, you mentioned that. And I'm always fascinated by people naming either pen names, even their character names. Like, it takes me 4.5 centuries to name a pet. How on earth do you choose a pen name?
Well, I actually, it's a stupid story because I was pregnant with my second child, and my husband and I were, sort of going back and forth the way you do over names. And he's Italian, he's from Florence, in a very old Florentine family. And so he, all the names I would say, he would say no. So we were driving by, and I saw on a lamppost, it said, Chiama Eloisa, lose 20 pounds in 20 days. Right? It was one of those lampposts. And I was like, Eloisa, that's a great name. And my husband said, that's totally nouveau riche. You cannot, and I was like, fine, I love that name. So when they called, they wrote me an email and they were like, we have to have your pseudonym now, because of course for copyright reasons. He happened to be reading Henry James. And so I became Eloisa James. So there wasn't a lot of thought put into it. I honestly just thought I was writing the 3 novels that I had sold, and that would be it. But it turned into a lifelong career. So,
well, do you still love the name Eloisa?
Yeah,
It's good.
it was very, very, very fortunate name. I mean, you don't think about this kind of thing, but the shorter your name is, for all of you out there who are going to maybe want to be posted paperback someday, you'd like to have a short name, because that way it can be bigger on the cover, and also it can show up above the little slots in, say, Target and Walmart. So there you go.
Nice. That's good to know. Thank you. All right. So thank you for indulging me. If you've heard me talk about naming anything, then you know that it takes me forever. As I mentioned, naming pets. I can't imagine choosing a pen name for myself. I would be terrible at it. But I like that there are some things to consider in terms of choosing that pen name. Shorter is better, and it will appear in different ways. I think, I don't know why this occurred to me, but shorter is better. Eloisa James. It's not a long name. But, there's only, 5 letters in Eloisa, Eloisa, 6, but it's 4 syllables. There's almost as many syllables as there are letters. This is the way my brain works. We need to take a break. We are going to talk about the book when we come back. I know I asked random questions here in the intro, but again, how my brain works. So stick around. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Eloisa James. As we get into this second segment, just your final reminder that if you want to support the podcast and the network in another way, in a financial way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info and leave a tip or a donation. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.info. You'll see it scrolling at the bottom throughout this episode. And thank you, as always, for every bit of support that you give. Before the break, Mary, who writes as Eloisa James, was talking about choosing a pen name and some of the things to think about in terms of choosing that pen name. Let's actually talk about the series and the book now and get back to that conversation. This is the first book. Viscount Love is the first book in a series called The Accidental Brides. So do you want to talk first about the series as a whole?
Sure. It's when you've been writing for a long time, you have to reinvent where you're going and what you're thinking about a lot. So with The Accidental Brides, I was really thinking about women who find themselves married but would not necessarily have chosen the path that's in front of them, and what that's like what kind of decisions do we make in life that we find ourselves doing that actually turn out to be wonderful, and as I've got older, I find more and more that old aphorism about, it really will turn out for the best is true. Like, if you don't get a job, the one that comes along will be the right one. Or if you didn't get accepted to school in France, but you went to Portugal, not that I'm saying that but I'm just saying that will turn out to be a wonderful thing for you. So I wanted to explore that a little. So yeah, I decided to do a series. It's going to be an interesting series because I switched publishers halfway through. So The first two will come out with my current publisher, HarperCollins. The second one, Hardly a Gentleman, will come out in next June. And then the next two after that will come out with Simon & Schuster. And they are going to be different because editors actually have a tremendous part to play in a book. And so that's been really fun for me. So it's all, you'll see the same characters because I always pretty much try to build the whole character set before I start. Mm-hmm. So the characters will be there, but there will be changes because writing is incredibly malleable.
Yeah. Interesting. That'll be really interesting to see how noticeable the differences are. Will there be, you think the cover art will be different?
You're going to notice them. You're really going to notice them.
Cover art, will the cover art be different, do you think, for the second two? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I haven't seen anything yet, but they've decided to do something completely new and different. And I don't know what that's going to mean, but the sort of the off print that bought me I visited in New York, a lot of really young women, and they're really excited about just creating something completely different. So no dress porn on the cover, no girl looking the other way, no naked guy in the stream. Yeah. It's going to be different. I'm just psyched to see they're trying to create change in historical romance. So that's exciting. Yeah. And that's my writing and the cover and the format. They'll be in a bigger format. They're not going to be in mass market paperback. Okay. They'll be in trade paperback.
Well, I'm intrigued. Yeah. That's exciting. So, well, the first one is out, Viscount Love. That's what we're talking about today. So can you give an overview of the story?
Sure. Viscount Love is, my heroine has dyslexia, and her name is Torie. That really came from me, from one of my students. A lot of what I write about comes from being a professor of very young people, right? Seeing what's happening in their life. So I had a really brilliant student who was my advisee. Halfway through his time at Fordham, was diagnosed with dyslexia. And I was shocked. I mean, he was so smart. I thought he was a terrible speller. And I kept, saying, hey, spell check is for you, that kind of thing. But in fact, he was dyslexic. And so that made me think about what it'd be like to be dyslexic back in the 1800s when they had no way of understanding what was going on. And so my heroine has basically been written off as stupid. Mm-hmm. She cannot read. she can't write unless she writes in blue ink, which is one of the really interesting things I learned about dyslexia. Sometimes people can write in a different ink,
Yeah.
but not in black. So when she has to sign the marriage book, for example, she has the bishop does not want her to be signing the book in blue ink, and there has to be a distraction so she can actually sign rather than putting in an X, and she will never learn to read.
Yeah.
So her older sister is very protective and her father is, trying to find her a husband. She's been on the market for 3 years, so to speak. She's a painter, but she's only allowed to paint ladylike subjects like bunnies and flowers, and that turns into something very funny. So it's really, a lot of it is about expectations. What do people expect from you? If they expect you to be a painter of bunnies and flowers, then that's all you are, right? You're just like making Hallmark cards. In
Yeah.
fact, she's a brilliant painter. And if you can't read, they expect you to be stupid. And it takes the hero a while to figure out that she's one of the smartest people he's ever met,
Yeah.
and definitely his peer. So that was fun because it's a comeuppance novel. And in a sense, all of these are. Comeuppance is this lovely driver, I think, of novels where it's not just about falling in love, it's about the world feeling right at the end, like some wrongs have been righted.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about the blue ink, but my husband is dyslexic, and we actually, and he grew up in a time when it was less known than it is now. I think we've made really good strides. But we were reading the Percy Jackson series, and they, because they're demigods, they're considered dyslexic, and they talked about white font on black, and that was the first time we'd heard of that. And he started reading that way and found it was much easier.
Much easier.
So
I think that those were written for his son, who is dyslexic, right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure, but that would make sense. But it's amazing what you learn and how things have changed. And so, as I was reading the book and thinking about Torie's character, she would have just been written off as stupid or
stupid. That was it. If you can't learn to read,
right,
you're an idiot. Period.
Yeah.
So a lot of what these books are about, in the Accidental Bride period, is like how people get written off unfairly and incorrectly, and how they then sort of recoup the world's attention, but in particular, fall in love with someone who learns what they're like.
Yeah. So was the dyslexia portion of it kind of the inspiration for the story itself, or did you have a different jumping off point for the story?
No, when I'm writing a story, often I need to get a sort of a major part of a character fixed before the plot starts to unwind. So I knew sort of where I wanted to go, but the story really started to build after my experience with my student who was dyslexic. Because it just comes from a question: what would that have been like?
Yeah.
Very often my novels have a center question like what would that have been like? Because I write historical romance and I am a Shakespeare professor, so I could lecture you endlessly about what was going on in the 1800s in politics and cultural life and domestic life, but that would be really boring. And the only way, I think, to write an interesting historical novel is to make whatever the central question is an intrinsic part of the plot. So, and hopefully people think, when I've written, for example, about addiction, because there were huge opium addiction problems in the 1800s, same as there are now, and then people write me and say, oh my God, this really made me think about my brother's, situation or whatever. So very often I will take something that's happening in our life and realize there's a parallel in the 1800s or the 1700s that will make a great story.
And I love something that you do with Torie at the beginning of the book, in that this is a time of corsets and pushing up your assets. And you write about some of Torie's wardrobe choices at the beginning, where she's literally almost spilling out of the top of her corset, which kind of, in some people's eyes, just reinforces that she's kind of a, we would call it a dumb bimbo or something in this day and age, kind of, and you do that really well with she likes fashion and she's just doing the latest fashion, but the way people perceive her is so influenced by what their expectations of her are.
Exactly. Yep.
So,
I
so
mean, we
we've
have
talked.
wonderful cartoons of women at the time with who their nipples are actually showing, and they're
Yeah.
at the opera or they're at the theater and they've slipped out of that little tiny.
Well, it wouldn't be hard. Because they were.
No, it really wouldn't.
It couldn't
So,
have been comfortable either. Like I want to kind of console my own anatomy because it feels painful.
yeah,
Um,
it's been tough.
what about Dominic? So we've talked about Torie. What about Dominic as the male main character? What about him might resonate with readers?
Well, I wanted him. So when you think of one character, the other one has to fit sort of in some way philosophically, right? I write about alpha men, so I like men who can get things done. I really, I married one. I like those men. I like a man who can change a tire. So he can do all that. But on the other hand, I really wanted to have him. He loses his temper in Parliament, and he's been fighting for against slavery for his entire career, and he's not going to win.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really key. I didn't want it to be a sort of a white savior book where he's like, okay, I put it in such a time that these laws can be passed. They're not going to pass. They're not going to pass. He's not going to win. Um, but that doesn't mean he doesn't keep fighting.
Mhm.
So again, it's a question of a perception. Like people see him as this incredibly bad-tempered. They see him as, um, grumpy, and she's sunshine, let's say. So he's grumpy, right? He's
Yep.
really
Yep.
grumpy. Well, he's grumpy because he's fighting something and he's realizing that it's really all about economics and that his fellow people don't care because they are becoming rich.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a really interesting time period for that. Our closest sort of analog is Jane Austen, whose brothers were very involved in abolitionist fights of that kind, and she portrays men from that time who are losing all their money, going off to the plantation, coming back with money. And you can see this sort of undercurrent of disdain in her writing. She doesn't come out and say it. So I wanted to give him an impossible task because she cannot learn to read and he cannot solve the problem of slavery. It will only be solved by economics and time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah. And you're reading it, and as a reader, you're partially expecting, well, of course he's going to win. It's a book, but historically speaking, no, that's not the right
Yeah.
not the right
No,
time.
my,
For me, as a reader, I know that when a main character is faced with a task that seems impossible, there's always the hope for me that that task will be, the impossible will be achieved. But of course, with historical fiction, you have to stick with the historical time frame, and you can't just make something happen that isn't historically accurate. There's a line that has to be walked in terms of some things that you kind of fudge in historical fiction and other things not so much. And we're going to continue this conversation when we come back. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Eloisa James. We are talking about the first book in her Accidental Brides series. It's called Viscount in Love. And before the break, she was describing the fight that Dominic, the male main character, is having, is struggling with or working towards. He's trying to abolish slavery as a member of Parliament, and it's the wrong time period for that in terms of the historical setting. And we're going to continue that conversation that she started. Just wanted to remind you of what we were talking about before the break. Let's get back to that conversation.
when you're writing historical fiction or romance and you're a professor who's spent a lot of time studying historical fact, you're walking a very narrow line in what is actually historically accurate and what isn't. Where are you not historically accurate and where are
Right.
you? My people brush their teeth like crazy. Not necessarily historically accurate, although very well-bred people in England had maids brushing their teeth right and left. Well, my people brush their own teeth, little things like that, and then larger ones. So
Thanks, because when you're a certain type of reader, you don't want to think about, because it's a spicy book.
Yeah.
You really just don't want to think about the making out of with the not brushing of the teeth.
yeah,
So,
exactly. So
two other characters I want to talk about a little bit, and that's the twins. Because talk about expectations. I picture them a little bit like they should be in the Addams Family.
yep.
So
That's
talk
it.
about, where they came from, why they're in the book.
Well, they came from the fact, I mean, so Florence and Valentine are these incredibly sort of eccentric, quirky children who basically the hero has to adopt. They're his sister's children, and she passes away. So what happened was I found an old notebook which had my daughter's stories from when she was that age, when she was like 11 years old, and she was writing horror stories. They're just horrendous. There's one which doesn't make it into the book where, the young girl has killed like her mother and she's hiding behind the couch, and there's all kinds of things. So this little fragments of the story that appear in there that are Florence's are actually my daughter Anna's. That is actual true sort of transmittal of her stories. So it's a bit of an Easter egg because I wrote a book called Paris in Love, also by, published as Eloisa James, which was a memoir of our year in Paris when Anna was 10 years old. And so you know how it is with books, people pick it up. And for them, she's still 10 years old. So they write me and they say, how is she doing? And I said, well, she's, 26. She just turned 26. So time has passed. But, just for people who loved her at that age, because she was very quirky and odd, I put those stories in there and shaped a character who turned out to be not very much like Anna, but is that sort of lovely moment in a young girl's life when they are utterly themselves without society having come in and sort of make a neat box.
Yeah.
So,
and talk about societal pressures and expectations. They're there, and I started that sentence and then I couldn't get out of it. But societal expectations were in a lot of ways even worse in this time period and this society.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think they were worse. I mean,
Yeah.
where you were allowed to grow and change and be was very, very narrow.
Yeah.
And of course, for us, that is, as it was then, a class and education level, but still women have more chance
Yeah. Yeah.
to be.
And they also provide the twins also provide some lighter moments, even though they have kind of a darker personality, they provide the lighter moments because they have this whole list of things that they're not supposed to talk about because they just talk about whatever. They don't care about societal expectations.
Right. They're just developed. So they're making this list of things that they cannot say. But of course, those are all the things they're most curious about.
They're 11.
So
They want
when you start, when you're thinking of a series, you're sort of like, okay, how do I want to populate this world? And I can't have children like that in every single book. Like it would make sense.
Yeah.
But I will say that I have a remarkable young woman, slightly older, in the third book that I just turned in, that she does belong in the Addams Family, and she is hysterically funny. And I am thinking of possibly linking her up with Valentine at some point in the future.
Okay,
So
good. Good
all
to
of you out there who absolutely loved Valentine and Florentine, you will probably see them again.
Well,
Florence.
Valentine has to marry someone so that Florence can go on the honeymoon with them. That's
Yeah, well, that's not going to be a problem.
at 11. They're planned at 11. When it comes to characters, it sounds like you mentioned that you like to kind of populate the whole series beforehand. So I imagine you have a really decent understanding of most of the characters before you start writing. How much do they change as you write, or do you kind of have that?
They change tremendously. Yeah. They change while you're writing them. So, the heroine, Clara, of the second book, Hardly a Gentleman, that come out in June. So she appears and she's the only person who gets outside the hero and heroine who gets a chapter from her point of view, which sort of put her in line to be the heroine. But, things like she's making these reticules, which are little bags that she likes to make them so they have a animal's face, but only animals that have whiskers. And then she creates the whiskers out of wire. That came out of nowhere. And then, the wired bag became an important part of the plot of this book. When we get to the plot of her book, they become even more important because I wanted to talk about people who are out of step with where people think they should be. So as a young lady, she wants to lie on a couch and read books and make reticules of little whiskered animals. She does not want to do the things that ladies are supposed to do, like, love the opera and learn how to embroider and make your own, stitch things. And she wants to lie on the couch with an apple and read books. Bad
I am
books,
Clara.
not
Yeah,
the good
I
ones,
can.
the bad ones. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Gothic novel. So, yes, I had a lot of fun creating her, but part of her sort of grew and changed as the first book, which she's in, but not the heroine of. And then when she launches into being a heroine, it's just tremendously fun. Yeah, to
Yes.
see her change.
Yeah.
And she too becomes an accidental bride.
Hence, I mean, yeah, she has to. It's a series. What kinds of research do you like to do for a series like this?
I don't actually do much research beforehand. What I have to do beforehand is figure out what the main questions are, like dyslexia or fitting in. Then I do the research as I go. So I do a lot, like I did a lot of research into dyslexia as much as I could figure out because they weren't really talking about it at all because someone who couldn't read was basically, indicated they were of the servant class. And so I can give you an example. Like I wrote a book called The Taming of the Duke, which was about alcoholism. Hero is alcoholic. And to actually sort of dry him up, as it were, was really difficult because they did not medicalize that problem. So they didn't have, any of the sort of medical apparatus of understanding illness. So you're reading a lot of pamphlets that are, written by churches that are trying to, cast out the devil and
Yeah.
and so those for me are the really interesting historical sort of conundrums that I can try to figure out and present so that people think about, hey, they didn't know how to be alcoholic. They didn't know how to dry out at the time.
Yeah.
So
They didn't really even think of it as, it might have been a problem, but only insofar as it was making you do things in public that you shouldn't be doing, or, maybe you're
exactly.
not doing your responsibilities in the way they should be done. They didn't think of it as a disease or even
Right.
a problem per se.
Yep. But they had people, falling down drunk all over the place.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting sort of situation because when you're setting up a hero, he's never perfect, right? But he also
Right.
can't be drunk. So you do have to dry him out somehow.
Yeah.
So he,
Interesting.
I had him in a series. He's an alcoholic in the first book. And so by the time we get to his book, how's he going to dry out? How
Yeah.
is that going to happen? People did at the time, they did figure it out. So there are
Right.
pamphlets, accounts, and so on. Yeah.
Interesting. And I mean, you can try to cast out the devil, but that's not really good. It's not going to do much.
No, that's not going to do it. So
Yeah. Um, you've touched on this as we've talked, but what draws you to writing historical romance?
well, that's an interesting question. I've always just loved it. I mean, I loved it when I was in high school. I discovered romance through Harlequin romances, and then I, discovered some historical ones. But I loved Jane Austen before I discovered Harlequin romances, and then Georgette Hare, who's sort of like the next major author in that field. But because I'm a Shakespeare professor, because I spent, 8 years studying the past. And because I spent a great deal of my time teaching plays, which are people who are walking and talking in the past, right? And I'm teaching them to young people. I really love sort of making that real, bringing something real. So a lot of the stuff I have written has been stolen from some aspect of some Shakespeare play. Like I'll be teaching a play that I haven't taught about, thinking about this or that or the other thing, and turn it into a plot. So.
Yeah, thank you.
That would be more difficult to do in contemporary. I have written one contemporary novel, Lizzie and Dante, which was published under my real name, Mary Bly. And that was really fun. The challenges are totally different, you know?
Mhm.
So challenging, very challenging, both of them.
Yeah, thank you. Um, 4 books in this series, is that the arc, or is that set in stone?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, sometimes they go longer. Desperate Duchesses turned into 6. The Wilds, which are this family that lives by the edge of a bog. I think there's 8 of those books. So,
Okay.
things change. You might be asked to write a prequel, whatever. Things change. So I never set it in stone. I kind of let the characters do what they want to do.
Yeah.
At the moment, I have written 3, but there
Okay.
is a 4th one under contract. So yeah.
Okay. Mary writes historical romance. I know this, and yet when she said the phrase "a family who lives by a bog," my brain immediately went to magical realism or fantasy or something along those lines, and I was like, "Oh, I'm intrigued." I'm still intrigued, but maybe not quite for the same reason of what I thought when she said that. But back to the series and the works, or the number of books in the series. I like that she doesn't have that set in stone, that she kind of lets the characters dictate how many books there will be, because as so many authors I've spoken to have said, characters tend to have minds of their own, and they do what they want when they want. So it's good that she gives them that leeway. When we come back, we are going to be talking about a Christmas book that Mary wrote and why it's a little bit unusual. You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Eloisa James. We're talking about her Accidental Brides series, the first of which is Viscount in Love. Before the break, she was talking about the number of books in that series. There's currently 3 written. There should be a 4th, but that number is not necessarily set in stone. Let's return now to that conversation. I get a daily email that gives me different audiobooks that I might be interested in the categories I indicated I was interested in. And just last week, one of your audiobooks popped up. It was a Christmas book. So since it's December, any Christmas books you want to highlight?
Well, I've only written one, which is the
Okay,
one that's on sale, and it's called Affair Before Christmas. And that is actually a kind of funny book. It's one of my odder books, but they put it on sale every year at Christmas because it's my only Christmas book.
Okay.
So here's the conundrum at the heart of that book. So I'm writing in the Georgian period, which is earlier than the Regency, which this book is set in. Marie Antoinette, huge wigs. So I was really fascinated by those wigs because I was reading about, how the women with the wigs would be built basically on their head. They had to sleep sort of sitting up and they couldn't wash their hair. And, there was like bits of candle wax and all feathers and, birds, all kinds of stuff in that. So I started thinking about what that would actually be like as a person, as a woman, as part of a couple, as a hey, we're going to consummate this marriage moment.
Right.
How does that work? So yeah, it's a really fun book in that it starts with a huge conundrum. My hero and heroine are not happy. They fell in love in Paris in the most romantic way possible. And they got married and they are not happy in bed. It's not working. And so, you have to trust me, it works out. And those two problems intertwine. But it is a funny book. And when they asked me to write a Christmas book, I was like, well, there has to be a Christmas miracle in it, for it to be a proper Christmas book. So there's also a Christmas miracle.
Thank you. Perfect. I love it. And yeah, now I have lots of thoughts about wigs and intimacy. What are you working on currently?
Well, I just finished the third book in this series, the one that's going to be a departure for me. And so I'm waiting for the edits on that. So I've heard from my editor and she said, oh, I love the opening. And I was like, great. And then you're like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean you're going to visit your family? You have to finish reading this. But she had to go visit her family. So I'm sort of waiting to find out what the edits are in that. And meanwhile, I share it with basically all the young people in my family because my age range is sort of 20s to 30s for readers, generally speaking. I mean, they go much higher, but so I wait and hear from my nieces, for example. What did they think? What do they think? My daughter is a huge part of my book. So she actually always reads them. But with the third one, she actually started adding things in. So the Anna who you saw writing little stories in book one of these when she was 11 years old, when we get to book 3, she was reading and she was sending me, notes on her phone. She's like, Mom, this kiss is not sexy enough. They didn't even touch each other back then. He just touched her hand. She would have. So for all my readers, you are going to be so happy to be to have the benefit of Anna having fallen in love here in Italy with a young man, because at the moment she's like, yeah, if when he touches you the first time, woo. So yeah, she wrote some little, spiced it up a little. So I think that's going to be fun.
Has that ever been awkward for her, the fact that her mom writes spicy romance, or has she been okay with it for the most part?
No, it's never bothered her at all. Yeah.
That's good.
I think somebody, they usually ask me that, like, what would you think if your son read them? My son has read a few and he's perfectly survived fine. And, he makes videos for me sometimes for TikTok. So if you look at Eloisa James TikTok, the ones that are wry and funny, those are created by my son. They often have, Friends, people on them, or The Office characters or Simpsons. But I think that of historical romance in general and romance in general, anyone who reads them and comes away with a sense that men and women should have respectful and loving relationships can only be happier in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we were recording, you had mentioned books in translation, actually, which is always kind of fun. How many languages are your books translated into?
I think they're in about 26 different territories and languages. I mean, obviously some of them overlap because Portugal, for example, you can get the same language in different countries, and actually they can do their own translations. So, Spain is going to do one translation, but another Spanish-speaking country will do its own translation often rather than buy that. So it's really fascinating. I mean, I love seeing the foreign covers. They're a lot of fun. And like in Japan, for example, they might do the books and then they will do a manga version, and then they will do serialization in like young girls magazines. And so there's a lot of different ways that people read. And that's really fascinating to see when you see your books in different languages. Like, do they come out in hardcover? Do they come out in trade paperback? Are they in tiny little books? Are they appearing only in newsstands? Where and how are they being published?
Yeah. Do you have audiobooks as well?
In different countries?
Or just in general? I mean, you mentioned
Oh yeah, everything is on
read,
all my books are on audio. Yeah, you can find them anywhere. But not every country puts every book on audio, which can be very, very frustrating, especially now when so many readers are in audio. So for example, in England, my current publisher, Piatkus, has put everything on audio, but I've had several publishers in England over the years, and some of them have not done audio. So then you're stuck, and my agent goes to them and says, all right, you going to do audio or not? And they're like, well, we had this book back in 2010. And she's like, well, then give us back the audio rights because these readers want to read these books. And one of the things that's different in the last, I'd say, 10 years of this career is that people don't approach books in the way they did before. So, when there was only a bookstore, you would go in and see what's new. Now that's not there. So people read my books, in any order,
Yeah.
in any way. And they just expect then to find them all in audio, and that's not always possible. It is in the US because I'm sort of in control of that, but not, for example, in Australia and New Zealand territories. Some of the books are missing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting though, because I think it's changing worldwide. Like what I see is more sales of audio, I'm very popular in France, for example, and I see the audio having a lot more prominence there, things like that. So.
Yeah. I know it's kind of fun as an author when you are quote unquote out in the wild and you see your books out in the wild.
Yeah.
Has that happened to you in a country where you weren't expecting it?
No, I wish it would. I mean, I have a really great friend, Erica Ridley, who you should interview, who's a wonderful historical romance writer. And she and I were in London together last year to go to a conference, and we went in and out of bookstores looking for our books. And that was fun, to find them. We did find them in a few places, so that was nice.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly the same as like you're on the subway and you look down and someone's reading your book. That I would like to see.
Yes, I think that would be amazing. And the timing has to be perfect, right?
Yes, it has to be a tough day, and then you look down and there's somebody who's immersed in your book. The universe is saying, keep writing. But I mean, I would say that like people write to me through the website, and those letters sometimes it's a rough day and I'm just like, why am I doing this? I have two jobs. I chaired the English department at Fordham, which is very large, 3 campuses, through the pandemic. And there were a lot of times when I was like, why am I doing 2 jobs? How can I keep this up? And then I get letters from people saying, my sister was in hospice and we read a lot of your books and she laughed and I just want to thank you. I think, okay.
Yeah, that helps.
That's a book in the wild, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, why do you do this? So speaking of why do you do this, what made you start this journey to write for publication?
Well, I had to pay off my student loans. So yeah, my husband's Italian. You don't really pay for college in Italy.
Yeah.
So when we got married and he realized I had massive loans because I went to Harvard, Oxford, and Yale. And, a lot of that was paid, thankfully, but it wasn't all paid. And I ended up with $30,000 in loans, which for students now, sadly, is not that much.
Yeah.
But for me, for us as young professors, it was overwhelming. And so we had one baby and all of a sudden said, yeah, we really can't afford to have another one. And so I thought, well, I just have to pay these loans off because I can't just have one baby. So, yeah. So I wrote a book and it went up for auction and it sold. I had to write 3, but it sold for a few $1,000s over my student loans. So
Wow.
that started my career. And then it turned out to be just so much fun. So yeah.
That's great. What piece of advice would you give for someone who's thinking they want to write?
Acknowledge that you're going to write utter crap and it's okay. You can revise. That's what revising is for. Editing is the key thing. So don't think I'm going to write the book of my heart, then my heroine's going to be like this and it's going to be perfect. And here it is. When you put it down, if she starts changing, as you're typing, let her change. Let the plot change. Let yourself edit. Wake up in the middle of the night and think, wow, that was really boring. Go back and cut it. For a long time, I would write 20 pages and cut 10. And that's a great way to learn to write.
Yeah.
And you won't lose. Your words are not driven gold,
Yeah.
They're not. Like you're not a literary. I mean, I'm talking here for people who want to write genre fiction. You're not a literary person. You don't have to be a literary person, which means you don't have to think about yourself as if you were T.S. Eliot. And by the way, like The Wasteland was cut in half by Ezra Pound. So same thing, right? 20 pages goes down to 10. The Wasteland goes boom down. I think he cut it down by a third.
Oof.
So yeah.
I think that's a helpful and important reminder that even the classics, which we sometimes think of as beyond reproach or, somehow these impeccable pieces of writing had editors, and they had people who were still working on their craft as well. And I think that's a very interesting exercise, the writing 20 pages and then cutting 10. That would be, I think when you first started, it would be really hard because, you kind of put a lot into those words and then you're cutting half of them. But it would definitely be an interesting exercise. We are going to take our final break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about we'll be continuing this conversation, the editing, that exercise of 20 pages to 10, etc. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Eloisa James. Before the break, we were talking about advice for writers, and Mary was talking about writing 20 pages and then reducing that 20 pages down to 10. We're going to pick up that conversation kind of in that same spot. So let's go ahead now and go and finish up this conversation with Eloisa James. I would imagine when you first start doing it that way, it can be very humbling, but then it's probably also a really good exercise.
It is, but I will say one thing is that even after all these years, I mean, writing is just a struggle. You think you could call it in? No, you're constantly learning. So, and if you don't, you quit or you move on to another genre. I've seen in my career has been so long that many of the people that I started out with have moved into other genres, or writing suspense, or writing historical fiction, or just quit altogether and are like playing tennis. You either keep learning and changing and staying abreast of what's happening in relations between men and women, or women and women, or whatever kind of romance you're reading, or you become outdated and you can't just write the same thing over and over. You can't.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you can, but people aren't going to necessarily read it.
Nobody's going to read it. It won't be sold. Yeah, I'm really lucky because as a professor, I have these young kids. So I'm in this coming fall, I'm teaching Shakespeare and popular culture, which is a lot of fun because we do like Taylor Swift's Romeo and Juliet, and they can really get into that. But then I'm also teaching a creative writing class called Dragons, Dungeons, and Dukes. And so that's going to give me a bunch of young people. They all write fantasy these days. So it's all going to be dragons, I think. But, I'm going to have 10 dragon stories in the fall to read and to become acquainted with. And that's great fun.
But romantasy is very popular as well. So you could get some romance in there. You never know.
But that's fantasy,
that's what I mean. But it's still fantasy, but you could still, it's might not all be dragons, although there could also be someone who's in love with the dragon. That's popular.
Yeah, that is. I just read, just a shout out for everyone who loves dragons. I just read I think it's called To Tame a Dragon's Breath, which is it's one thing if you're a writer you've got to do is keep your eye on all of the debut novels that are selling a lot, that are getting talked about. Figure them, read them really carefully and think, why is this book doing so well? To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose. It's fabulous. I loved it. Not a romance. I mean, there's not a romance, but there's, great dragon time and a school, Harry Potter-ish in a way, but not, really fresh and different.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, that's a perfect segue into when you take time to read, just for you, what are your go-to authors and genres?
Well, I read everything except historical romance. My voice tends to be leaky, so I have to stay like, Julia Quinn is one of my closest friends. But if I say, "Oh, I'm going to go read the Bridgertons again," the next thing I write the next day is going to sound like Julia's
Sure.
prose. So I really stay away from that. I read a tremendous amount of mystery, of paranormal romance, of contemporary romance. I have favorite authors in Harlequin Presents whom I love, who are crazy. I think things that people don't realize is just how much freedom happened under a lot of these, in Harlequin Presents, for example, you have a very small sort of window of time in which you're building that plot, and the best writers can be absolutely bananas within those windows, do whatever they want. So I have favorite self-published authors, so to speak. If you call Mariana Zapata self-published at this point, I mean she's sold. I think her books are being published by St. Martin's now, but she's a wonderful writer, contemporary writer. So I read all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Most writers do.
I share one thing here.
According
PG
to Jeeves.
Wodehouse,
Okay.
it's not just reading people who are writing now, it's also
Right.
reading the people who were the funniest in the past.
Sure.
Read them again.
Sure. Well, I think most people don't know that Shakespeare was funny as heck. Like,
Yeah. No, they don't realize it till you start pointing out, synonyms for penis. Then they're like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody, I liked Shakespeare in high school, and I think I was one of, I didn't have a big class. My graduating class was 40 people. So it's not like I had a lot of contemporaries, but I think I was like the only one that enjoyed Shakespeare in high school.
Right.
And then nobody ever believed me that he's funny. So.
But there you go. I mean, you were taught Romeo and Juliet without ever seeing that Romeo, I mean, Juliet sends Romeo a ring. There's nothing like that before. And so it spurred all these imitations on the stage in the 7 years afterwards, where women were coming out and going, "Hey, you want to climb up to my balcony?" Ha ha ha. So it was a shocking then, but now it's just buried.
I proposed to my husband, and now I feel like, hey, me and Juliet.
You're Juliet. There
Love
you
it.
go. Yeah, yay.
That's my affirmation for the day. Thank you. And if people want to learn more about you, the books, etc., website and social media that you're active on.
Yeah, eloisajames.com is great. And I have a lot of stuff going on Instagram. TikTok is really funny for, basically what goes on in TikTok. I have, an undergraduate at Fordham who creates some videos, and my son creates some, occasionally my daughter creates some. So those tend to be very funny. I'm not sure they sell books, but it is a really fun place I enjoy those videos a lot. Okay. So, and then I'm on Facebook, and I also have a Facebook group called Linda Castle. And that's a very passionate, smaller group who love thinking about historical questions and dissecting the books. And they're a really great community for each other. So right now they're doing a big Christmas card swap, and they are enormously supportive of my work, and I'm so grateful for them.
Wonderful. So. Okay. Thank you. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure you highlighted?
I can't think of anything. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you talking to me.
Thank you again to Mary, writing as Eloisa James, for joining me to talk about Viscount in Love and the Accidental Brides series, and also for reminding me to read more historical romance, because it's a genre that I enjoy, and it's a genre I used to read all the time, and I need to read more. So I am glad that I have a new author that I can read more in that genre, and she mentioned a couple of others that I may pick up as well. So good to remind myself to go back to a genre that I like and have not read in a while. So thank you to Eloisa. If you are a fan of historical romance, or maybe you haven't read it in a while like me, but or you're just looking for a new author, definitely check out Eloisa's books. You've got the first one in this book. The second one's coming out in 2025, but you've got completed series as well. So that's always exciting to find a new author and to find a series that are already completed. You can read them all at once, one of my favorite things. If you're looking for a Christmas book, she does have, as we talked about, a Christmas book that you might find enjoyable. Maybe you're looking for gifts this holiday season. I know we're getting closer to the end of December. I can't believe it's the middle of December already. We are just careening toward another year. New Year's is coming up, but if you're still looking for holiday gift ideas and you or someone you know are fans of historical romance, here you go. Lots and lots of options to choose from. I thank you again for joining me for this episode. Hopefully you'll join me for the next episode on Tuesday. I will be speaking with returning author Maddie Dalrymple. She's been on the podcast before. I always enjoy speaking with her. We've talked about 2 different series when Maddie has been on the podcast. This time we will be talking about book 5 in the Lizzie Ballard series. And Lizzie Ballard is a very interesting character who has the ability to cause strokes in other people. She's lived a very isolated life because of this. And there's a lot more than just that simple explanation. But like I said, this is book 5, and Lizzie is still getting into situations that are thankfully not situations I have to deal with. So I am looking forward to speaking to Maddie about what has happened in Lizzie's life, what might be happening to her next, etc. So hopefully you will join me for that interview, speaking with Maddie over the weekend, and then that interview will come out on Tuesday, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. So please join me for that. In the meantime, as always, if you are a fan of this podcast, please do like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you either listen to it or watch it on. Also, share an episode that you enjoy with someone you think may also enjoy it. All these things help the algorithm. Something else that really helps the algorithm is to leave a positive review. Really helps the podcast out. It's greatly appreciated. You can also follow the podcast on social media: Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. So come find the podcast on social media. Tell me what you're reading. Tell me all the good stuff. All those nosy questions I love to ask and hear the answers to. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you have a good weekend coming up. Whatever you need it to be, whether that's relaxation or productivity or a combination thereof. But regardless of that, I hope that you find plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to